My sister-in-law stole the money which I had saved to buy a laptop. My brother sided with her, so I left them. A year later, I got a call from a hospital. I, 32F, had been living with my brother, 35M, and his wife, 34F, for the past 3 years. It all started when I lost my job during the economic downturn. I was working as a marketing coordinator for a small startup that unfortunately couldn't weather the financial storm. The company went under, and suddenly I found myself unemployed and struggling to make ends meet in the expensive city I called home. At first, I tried to make it work. I dipped into my savings, picked up odd jobs, and even tried my hand at freelancing. But as the months wore on and my bank account dwindled, it became clear that I couldn't afford my apartment anymore. That's when my brother stepped in. My brother, let's call him Mark, has always been my rock. Growing up, he was the one who protected me from schoolyard bullies, helped me with my homework, and gave me advice about life. When our parents passed away in a car accident 10 years ago, Mark became more than just a brother. He became my only family. So when Mark offered me a place to stay until I got back on my feet, I was incredibly grateful. He and his wife, Sarah, had a spare room in their house, and they insisted it was no trouble. At first, everything was great. It felt like old times, with Mark and I staying up late talking and laughing like we used to. Sarah seemed okay with the arrangement initially. She and I had never been particularly close, but we were always cordial. I remember when Mark first introduced us to her 7 years ago. She was charming and vivacious, and I was happy to see my brother so in love. But there was always something about her that made me slightly uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it then, and I brushed it off as just being protective of my brother. Things started to change about 6 months into my stay. Sarah began making snide comments about how long I was planning to stay. At first, they were subtle, a raised eyebrow here, a sigh there. But gradually, they became more overt. She'd say things like, "Don't you think it's time you found your own place?" Or, "I'm sure someone with your skills could find a job if you really tried." I tried to brush it off, thinking she was just having a hard time adjusting to having a long-term guest. I redoubled my job search efforts and tried to contribute more around the house, doing extra chores and cooking meals to show my appreciation. But Sarah's behavior only worsened. She'd accidentally throw away my mail, claiming she thought it was junk. Once, I missed an important interview because the invitation got lost in the trash. She'd use my toiletries and never replace them, leaving me without shampoo or toothpaste more times than I can count. The incident that really opened my eyes to how bad things had gotten was when Sarah mistakenly donated a box of my clothes to charity. It wasn't just any clothes. It was a box containing some of my most treasured possessions, including the dress I wore to my college graduation and a sweater that had belonged to our mother. When I confronted her about it, she played innocent and said she thought they were old clothes meant for donation. But the look in her eyes told me she knew exactly what she was doing. I tried talking to Mark about it, but he always defended Sarah. He'd say things like, "That's just how she is," or, "I'm sure she didn't mean it." It was frustrating, but I didn't want to cause trouble, so I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to risk losing the only family I had left. As time went on, I noticed other troubling behaviors from Sarah. She seemed to be isolating Mark from his friends and even some of his family members. I remember one Thanksgiving when she threw a fit because Mark wanted to spend the holiday with our elderly aunt instead of her family. She gave him the silent treatment for days after that. Despite my concerns, I kept quiet because Mark seemed happy. When they got married 5 years ago, I hoped Sarah would mellow out. But if anything, she became worse. She started controlling their finances, giving Mark an allowance despite him being the primary earner. She would check his phone regularly and accuse him of cheating if he so much as spoke to a female coworker. Things came to a head last week. I had been saving up for months to buy a new laptop for my freelance work. I kept the cash in an envelope in my dresser drawer. One day, I came home to find the envelope missing. When I asked Sarah about it, she claimed she hadn't seen it. But then I saw a brand new designer purse on the coffee table, something she had been eyeing for months but said she couldn't afford. I confronted her again, this time more forcefully. She broke down and admitted she had taken the money, saying she thought I owed it to them for letting me stay so long. I was furious and hurt. When Mark came home, I told him everything. To my shock and disappointment, he sided with Sarah. He said I should have been more careful with my money and that I was being ungrateful for all they had done for me. That was the last straw. I packed my bags that night and left. I'm currently staying at a friend's place while I figure out my next move. I can't believe my own brother would choose his lying, thieving wife over me. I feel lost and betrayed. Mark is the only family I have left, and I never thought our relationship would come to this. Part of me wants to forgive and forget, but another part feels like I can never trust them again. To give some more context, Sarah has always been a bit of a handful. When she and Mark first started dating, I had my reservations. She seemed overly possessive and would often try to isolate Mark from his friends and family. I remember one time when Mark and I had planned a weekend camping trip, something we'd done every year since we were kids. The night before we were supposed to leave, Sarah suddenly came down with a mysterious illness that required Mark to stay home and take care of her. Miraculously, she recovered as soon as the weekend was over. Despite my concerns, I kept quiet because Mark seemed happy. I told myself that maybe Sarah just needed time to adjust to being part of our family. After all, she had a difficult childhood herself. Apparently, her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother remarried multiple times, which left Sarah with trust issues. Mark would often use this as an excuse for her behavior, saying she just needed extra reassurance because of her past. I understand that everyone has their baggage, but I don't think that excuses Sarah's behavior. She's been manipulating and gaslighting Mark for years, and now she's turned her tactics on me. I feel like I'm losing my brother to this toxic relationship, and I don't know what to do. Part of me feels guilty for leaving. What if Sarah escalates her behavior now that I'm not there to act as a buffer? But another part of me is relieved to be out of that toxic environment. I just wish Mark could see Sarah for who she really is. I'm torn between cutting all ties and trying to maintain some sort of relationship with my brother. He's all the family I have left, but I can't stand by and watch him be manipulated like this. Any advice on how to move forward would be appreciated. Update 1. It's been 6 months since I moved out of Mark and Sarah's house, and a lot has happened. I wanted to give an update on the situation and share some developments. After I left, I stayed with my friend for about a month before finding a small studio apartment. It's not much, but it's mine, and I don't have to worry about anyone stealing from me or messing with my stuff. I've been throwing myself into my freelance work, and thankfully, business has been good. I've managed to land a few regular clients, which has provided some much-needed stability. For the first couple of months, I didn't hear anything from Mark or Sarah. I was hurt, but also relieved not to have to deal with the drama. Then, about 3 months ago, Mark started reaching out. At first, it was just casual texts asking how I was doing. I responded politely, but kept things brief. I wasn't ready to let my guard down yet. As time went on, his messages became more frequent and seemed more desperate. He would ask if we could meet up for coffee or lunch, but I always found an excuse to decline. Part of me wanted to see him, to try and mend our relationship, but another part was still too hurt and angry. About a month ago, I ran into Mark at the grocery store. It was a small local place that we used to go to together when we were younger. Seeing him there, in a place filled with so many memories, caught me off guard. It was awkward at first, but we ended up talking for a while in the parking lot. Mark looked tired and stressed, nothing like the confident, happy brother I remembered. He told me that things at home weren't great. Sarah had become even more controlling since I left. She had convinced him to quit his job because she didn't like him working with female colleagues. Now he was working from home, doing some online gig that Sarah had found for him. I was shocked to hear this. Mark had loved his job at the architectural firm. He had been there for over a decade and had been on track for a partnership. It was his dream job, something he had worked towards since college. I couldn't believe he had given it up. As we were talking, Sarah called him. I could hear her yelling through the phone, demanding to know where he was and who he was talking to. Mark looked panicked and quickly ended our conversation, promising to call me later. He never did. This encounter left me feeling even more conflicted. On one hand, I was still hurt and angry about how Mark had treated me. On the other hand, I was worried about him. It was clear that Sarah's behavior had escalated, and I feared for my brother's well-being. I decided to reach out to some of our mutual friends to see if they knew more about the situation. What I learned was disturbing. Apparently, Sarah had systematically cut off almost all of Mark's friends. She had convinced him that they were bad influences, or that they were trying to come between them. One friend, Tom, who had been Mark's best friend since college, told me a particularly troubling story. He said that he had noticed bruises on Mark's arms a few months ago and had confronted him about it. Mark had brushed it off, claiming he had accidentally hurt himself while doing some home repairs. Tom didn't buy it and tried to talk to Mark about domestic abuse, but Mark shut him down and hasn't spoken to him since. Hearing all this made me realize that the situation was far worse than I had imagined. Mark wasn't just in a bad relationship. He was in an abusive one. I felt guilty for not seeing the signs earlier and for leaving him alone with Sarah. I started thinking back to all the little things I had noticed over the years but had dismissed. The way Mark would flinch sometimes when Sarah raised her voice. The times he would cancel plans at the last minute with vague excuses. The gradual changes in his personality. How he became less outgoing, less confident, more anxious. I remembered one incident from about 2 years ago that now seemed much more sinister in light of what I knew. Mark and I had planned to go to a concert together. It was a band we both loved, and we had been excited about it for months. On the day of the concert, Mark called to cancel, saying he wasn't feeling well. When I saw him a few days later, he had a cut on his lip. He claimed he had fallen, but now I wonder if there was more to the story. I'm torn about what to do now. Part of me wants to rush in and try to save Mark, but I know that could backfire. He's still defending Sarah and might not be ready to accept help. Plus, I'm worried that if I push too hard, Sarah might completely isolate him and I'll lose any chance of helping. For now, I've decided to keep the lines of communication open. I've started responding more to Mark's messages and have even suggested meeting up again. He hasn't taken me up on the offer yet, but I'm hoping he will when he's ready. I'm also looking into resources for people with loved ones in abusive relationships. I want to be prepared to help Mark when he's ready to accept it. I've been reading books on the subject and even attended a support group for family members of abuse victims. It's been eye-opening and heartbreaking to hear stories similar to Mark's. This whole situation has been a roller coaster of emotions. I'm still hurt by what happened, but now I'm more worried than angry. I just want my brother to be safe and happy. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm committed to being there for him, even if it's from a distance for now. I keep thinking about our parents and what they would say if they could see us now. They always taught us to look out for each other, and I feel like I've failed in that. But I'm determined to make it right somehow. Mark is the only family I have left, and I'm not giving up on him. Update 2. It's been a year since my original post, and I have another update to share. A lot has changed, and I'm still processing everything that's happened. About 2 months ago, I got a call from Mark in the middle of the night. It was around 2 a.m., and I was sound asleep when my phone started ringing. At first, I thought it might be a work emergency. I had recently taken on a client in a different time zone. But when I saw it was Mark, my heart started racing. We hadn't spoken on the phone in months, and a middle-of-the-night call could only mean trouble. When I answered, Mark's voice was shaky and quiet. He told me he was at the hospital. Apparently, Sarah had gotten violent during an argument, and he had finally called the police. She was arrested, and he was getting checked out for his injuries. I rushed to the hospital, not sure what to expect. The drive there was a blur. I remember running every red light and praying I wouldn't get pulled over. When I arrived and saw Mark, my heart broke. He had a black eye, bruises on his arms, and a defeated look that I had never seen before. As soon as he saw me, he broke down crying and apologized for everything. Over the next few days, the whole story came out. The abuse had been going on for years, starting with emotional manipulation and escalating to physical violence. Sarah had isolated him from friends and family, controlled all their finances, and convinced him that he was worthless without her. Mark admitted that he had known for a long time that something was wrong, but he had been too ashamed and scared to ask for help. He said he realized how bad things were when Sarah stole my money, but he was too deep in the fog to stand up to her then. The incident that finally pushed him to call the police was when Sarah threatened to hurt herself if he tried to leave. He realized then that the situation was dangerous, not just for him, but potentially for her too. As Mark shared more details about his life with Sarah, I felt a mix of horror, sadness, and guilt. He told me about how Sarah would constantly belittle him, telling him he was stupid and worthless. She would fly into rages over small things, like him leaving a dish in the sink or talking to a female cashier at the grocery store. He described incidents where she would throw things at him, push him, or slap him. The physical abuse had started small, a shove here, a slap there, but had escalated over time. The night he called the police, Sarah had thrown a heavy vase at his head, narrowly missing him and shattering against the wall. Mark also revealed that Sarah had been manipulating their finances for years. She had maxed out credit cards in his name, taken out loans he didn't know about, and even remortgaged their house without his knowledge. He was now deeply in debt and wasn't sure how he was going to recover financially. Since that night, Mark has been staying with me. He filed for divorce and got a restraining order against Sarah. It hasn't been easy. There are days when he seems like his old self, laughing and joking like we used to. But there are other days when he's consumed by guilt and self-doubt. He often questions whether he did the right thing by leaving, wondering if he could have done more to make the relationship work. Mark is in therapy now and slowly starting to rebuild his life. He's reconnected with some old friends and is even considering going back to his old job at the architectural firm. His former boss was understanding about the situation and said they'd be happy to have him back when he's ready. As for me, I'm still processing my own feelings about everything. I'm relieved that Mark is safe and out of that toxic relationship. I'm angry at Sarah for what she did, but also at myself for not seeing the signs of abuse earlier. Most of all, I'm sad that we lost so much time and that Mark had to go through such a traumatic experience. Mark and I have had many long conversations over the past 2 months. He's apologized multiple times for how he treated me and for not believing me about Sarah. I've forgiven him, understanding now that he was a victim of abuse and wasn't fully in control of his actions. We're slowly rebuilding our relationship. It's not always easy. There's still hurt and mistrust to work through. But we're both committed to healing and moving forward together. We've started doing some of the things we used to enjoy together, like watching old movies or going for hikes. It feels good to reconnect with my brother again. One particularly emotional moment came when we were going through some old family photos. We found a picture of us with our parents from the last vacation we took together before they died. Mark broke down crying, saying he felt like he had let them down by letting things get so bad with Sarah. I reminded him that our parents would be proud of him for having the courage to leave an abusive situation and seek help. As for Sarah, she's facing legal consequences for her actions. She was charged with domestic violence and is currently awaiting trial. Mark is cooperating with the authorities, but he's also struggling with conflicting emotions about the whole situation. There are moments when he feels angry and wants justice, and others when he feels guilty for abandoning her. His therapist says this is normal for abuse survivors, but it's still hard to watch him go through it. The divorce proceedings have been complicated due to the financial mess Sarah created. Mark discovered that she had been gambling away a lot of their money, which explains some of the mysterious debts. He's working with a financial advisor and a lawyer to try and untangle everything, but it's going to be a long process. Despite all the challenges, I'm starting to see glimpses of the old Mark coming back. He's laughing more, standing up straighter, and even talking about future plans. Last week, he mentioned that he might want to go back to school to get his master's degree, something he had always wanted to do, but Sarah had discouraged. For now, we're taking it one day at a time. Mark is focusing on his therapy and starting to reconnect with old friends. I'm doing my best to support him while also taking care of my own mental health. It's a balancing act, but we're managing. This whole experience has been a harsh reminder that abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of gender or background. It's also shown me the importance of family and the strength that can come from supporting each other through difficult times. I'm not sure what the future holds for us, but I'm hopeful. Mark is slowly healing, and our relationship is growing stronger. We're relearning how to be a family again, just the two of us. It's different from what we had before, but in some ways, it feels more real and solid than ever. There are still tough days ahead, I'm sure. The legal proceedings with Sarah are ongoing, and Mark still has a lot of healing to do. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're on the right path. We're facing things together, just like our parents taught us to do. As I write this update, Mark is in the other room, on the phone with his therapist. I can hear him laughing at something, and it makes me smile. It's a small thing, but it gives me hope. We've been through a lot, but we're survivors. And together, I believe we can get through anything.